Welcome back to the Taz tutorial, and this is part 8 on clips. So I wanted to make this part on glitches as a whole, but I thought that was too big of a topic, so I've cut it back to just clipping. Now you might be wondering what is a clip, and essentially it's just passing through a wall or a ceiling or a floor in your game in an unintended way using the physics. So it's kind of like getting out of bounds or just passing through a wall that you're not supposed to. Now we're going to look at a lot of theories on how clipping works and lots of different things that you can try out. Just be aware that whatever game you're working with will be different, so try everything on this list and pretty much try anything that you can think of, because pretty much every different game will have a different way of getting out of bounds if you can get out of bounds. Now before I launch into any of the theories behind how clipping works, I want to show you a really bread and butter example from Super Mario 64. So our first example of a clip today comes from Super Mario 64, and this is a classic clip past the 50-star door. As we can see, this door and the wall form a solid wall that you can't get through, and we don't have 50 stars to open up the door. We're going to do a classic glitch called the backwards long jump to build up enough speed and get through. That gives Mario just enough speed to get through the whole wall there. Now let's look at actually what's happening. So just before we do the backwards long jump, we're going to jump forward and start moving backwards. So what we're going to do is look at the velocity number here, because that's really important. And as just a reminder, this program that I'm using to look at velocity is called ScriptHawk, and there'll be a link in the description. So Mario moves forward with positive velocity, and then it becomes negative as he starts moving backwards. Now the thing about velocity in this game is there's a cap on how fast you can move, but that only caps you in the positive velocity. It doesn't cap your negative velocity. So Mario can move backwards as fast as he wants, provided we can build up the speed. So every long jump we do builds up more speed, and as I do more and more long jumps, that number gets bigger and bigger. It's about 200 at the moment, and then about 300 by the time we leave the stairs, and that is enough speed to get completely through the wall. So from that Mario 64 example, you might be wondering, well, what's going on here? And this brings us to our first common method of clipping, and it's try building up a lot of speed. So you get lots of speed, you break the game. That's how it works in short. So let's look at something called a frame rate to explain why this works. So we've got Luigi sitting here and standing, but Luigi is going to be moving forward. Now the game doesn't do that smoothly. Luigi moves forward once per frame. So on frame 1, he might be sitting here, and then on frame 2, he might be a bit more forward just over there. The same pattern follows, and then on frame 3, he's moved forward yet again. And we see he's just moving at a constant speed. And that just keeps going. Now, depending how your game is programmed, depends how it handles these frames. So in a lot of games, pretty much it'll just check for a wall every frame. So if Luigi's in a wall, it will spit him backwards. And we'll see what that looks like. So here's Luigi moving forward again and again, and then the next frame he's going to be in a wall. So what does the game do? Well, usually it'll do something to spit Luigi out, push him back, and then he'll be right up against the wall the next frame. And a lot of games will then just completely zero off your speed and make him stop when this happens. So that's how walls work. Usually walls are thick enough that it will push the character back. In 3D games, the walls are usually thin like this, but in 2D games, they're usually a lot thicker. So what happens when you have more speed? Well, Luigi's standing there, and he moves further in a frame because he's got more speed. The game usually only runs at 60 frames a second, or 30, depending what game you're looking at, or 50 and 25 if you're playing in a PAL region, but the frame rate is usually the same. So if you got more speed, you move further in a frame. So this frame, he's just before the wall, and next frame, he's after the wall. Completely skip the wall. Now, this will only work in some games. An example of where it doesn't work is Banjo-Kazooie, where something like this will detect that there was a wall in between both frames. But in a game like Mario 64, you can just pass straight through the wall, which is what we saw before. So speaking of Banjo-Kazooie, that's where our next example comes from. So in Mario 64, we saw that you can build up a lot of horizontal speed and get through a wall, Well, it's also true that you can build up a lot of vertical speed and get through a floor, and that's what we're going to see here. So we can see Banjo just on this ledge, and we want to get through this little bit of pipe here. So building up our vertical speed, we can fall straight through. And there we go. That gets us out of bounds, and if done correctly, this lets us skip the 640 note door. So let's look at what's happening. So Banjo gets into Talon Trot and gets hooked on the ledge, and I'm holding forward. Notice my Y velocity is what we're looking at now, and that is how fast I'm moving downwards. It's negative because we're going down. Now, Banjo's Y velocity will keep building up because he's still technically considered in the air, and it'll build up to our terminal velocity of minus 4,000. Now, you might be wondering, well, why isn't Banjo falling through the floor? He's going pretty quick. And, well, that's because the way Rare programmed it, they made sure that even if you're going at a speed of 4,000, you don't go through the floor, even though Banjo would pass through it in one frame. So then how do we get through? Well, there's a little gap in the corner of this. And the way that ledges work in Banjo are kind of weird, but it essentially means there's a little gap when you get to the corner. So we'll move over to the corner eventually, the left corner, and then Banjo will be able to fall through that little gap using the vertical speed that he's got. So it's a little bit more complicated than clipping in Mario 64, but it is really the same concept. Build up a lot of speed, clip through. So I'm hoping this animation can help explain why clipping in Banjo is a little bit more complicated than clipping in Mario 64. If this was a clip in something like Mario 64, it would work, because Banjo's got enough speed between frame 3 and 4 to get through this wall. But it doesn't quite work like that. In Banjo-Kazooie, what they do is they essentially chain Banjo with a little string between each frame. So you can see the little string does go through the wall, and because that little string has hit the wall, then Banjo will move back to where he would have been before hitting the wall. So it's not as thick as Banjo is, but it's just a little string that connects him between each frame. At least that's how I visualize it. If you want to use mathy words like projecting a linear path from frame A to frame B, you can, but just look at it like a little string if you like. So how do we actually clip through walls then? Well, we will need a small gap. So if we put the string in, then there we go. That gap is way too small for Banjo to actually fit through, but if he passes through the gap between frame A and frame B, he can actually get through the wall. So here's an example of another clip in Banjo, which should hopefully show what I mean. We can see that there's a little gap in this floor, the seam, just sitting here. And that is actually a gap in the floor. It's an error in the geometry of the level. So what we can do is just look around and see if we can get Banjo on that gap. And then he should be able to get through it with enough speed. That gap is very thin, so it takes a while to find it. There we go. And straight through with the ground pound. So, you might be wondering, is the ground pound very important? And the answer is yes. So you can see here, Banjo is jumping over the gap. And in Scripthawk, it says the floor is minus 9,000, whereas before, the floor was just 800. So the floor is definitely lower than it was before, meaning that we're sitting over the gap. And Banjo doesn't have his shadow projecting onto the floor, whereas before he had his shadow on the floor. So we're definitely sitting over the gap there. And in the video that I showed just before, Banjo does a ground pound, which gives him enough speed to get through the gap. But if I don't do the ground pound and just let Banjo fall into it, we can see that he just zips back out of the gap. You probably saw him get caught on the gap there and then zip back out. So this is an example of clipping where you need both enough speed and a gap in the geometry of the level. Okay, so far we've looked at clipping through building up a lot of speed, looking for gaps, or a combination of those two. The next thing we're going to look at is using lag to help us clip. Now, lag works differently in different games, but some games will speed up the character to compensate for lag happening. This speed up of the character can sometimes allow you to clip. So an example of lag to clip is in Donkey Kong 64. This game does speed up Donkey Kong when the game lags, and we've got this solid door blocking us from getting into Angry Aztec Lobby here. In this game, throwing oranges causes a bit of lag when they explode. So we throw 4 oranges and then kick at the door. When they explode, a bit of a speed boost to clip Donkey Kong into that room. So that's one example of lag to clip, and there's plenty of others in lots of different games as well. Okay, so we've now seen 3 methods of clipping, and the next 2 sort of come as a pair. So this applies more to 2D games. The first is to try getting as close as you can to the wall the frame before you hit the wall and watching your subpixels. And then the next one is to try holding away from the wall. Now, the last one might seem a little bit strange there, but the reason is most games will try and spit you out of a wall based on what direction you're holding. So if you're holding right, it spits you left, and if you're holding left, it spits you right. So sometimes if you want to clip into a wall and you want to clip towards the right, holding left can actually help. Very counterintuitive, but it works. So I've got some more animations to hopefully show what I mean. Here's our friend Luigi, and he is moving every frame. So each frame is another step forward. And then we're going to get this frame where he's in the wall. So the game doesn't actually want to put him in the wall. So usually either on the same frame where you go in the wall or the frame after, it will spit him back and then put him just before the wall. So that's how most games deal with this collision stuff. So you'll notice that the amount that it spits him completely back out of the wall, and then we've got no issues. Sometimes though, if we're actually a bit closer to the wall, then as you take each step, the step before you hit the wall is extremely close to the wall. So that means your next step is actually really far inside the wall. Now, depending on the nuance of the game, sometimes it fails to spit you back the entire distance out of the wall. So you do have a frame where you're kind of in the wall a little bit still. And this is where we can start having some shenanigans, such as holding left to get sucked towards the right, or other things that we'll see in our next example. Okay, so we're going to go over an example of a 2D clip now. And probably some of the most famous clips come from Super Mario Brothers, unsurprisingly. And this has a lot to do with subpixels and just precision in general. So what we're going to do is replicate this clip through this pipe, just for fun. Obviously, this doesn't serve much of a purpose in it has, but it's just an example of how we can clip through other things in the game. And in other places in the game, this does actually save time. So let's see how to replicate this. I'm going to go really through the whole process as if you were just discovering this clip on your own. So this will take a little while, but then hopefully it'll give you some insight into how these things are actually found. So I'm about to clear off all these inputs and we'll see if we can replicate this from scratch. So I'm just running right into the pipe. Note as well, I've got my X positions up here. So level X would be my pixel position, and then I've got my subpixels here. Just keep in mind, I'm looking at my subpixels in hex, so that might be a bit different, but hex makes it a lot easier to understand, in my opinion. So you'll notice if we run up against this pipe, my pixel gets locked at 130 and my subpixel just goes up and then wraps back around. So we're going to see if we can push this pixel any higher than 130. So let's see, as we run into the pipe, it's looking like it sits at 130 as soon as we hit the pipe. However, if I slow down a bit, suppose I do some left turns there, then we can see it's coming up towards the pipe. I hit 130 and then actually I hit 132. That's really good. So let's keep note of what we have, 132 and then 60. That's the best we've done so far. Okay. Now what's actually happening here is we're hitting on frame 691, 130 with E0. And then the next frame we're hitting 130, 260. So pretty much what's happening is we're just before hitting the edge of the pipe. The edge of the pipe would be starting at 131. And then right after that, we're hitting 132. Now, the game spits you out of the pipe. So even though we do go inside of it, it spits you back to 130. And then it just follows that pattern around again. So let's see. What I really would like to see is a higher number next to this 130. I've got 130 E0, but in theory I could go all the way up to 130 FF. And if I go any higher than 130 FF, I'd be in the pipe and it would have spit me out. So I can try moving these left presses back a bit. Then I hit 130 10 and nothing very good happens. So you can see I'm actually hitting 128.90 there. And then the next frame over, I would be hitting 131.10, and then it rounds it down to 130.10. So I've actually overshot the pipe a bit. Let's see what happens if I move it back a bit more. 130.30, and then I've overshot it again. Again, the situation here is I hit 128.B0. My next position would be 131.30, 131, and then a subpixel of 30. That's in the pipe, so it will spit me straight back out to 130.30. So let's try moving these left presses forward a bit. 130A0 and then 132.20. That's a little bit worse than the one we had before, but we're getting towards the right idea. So let's see if we can shuffle these forward maybe a little bit more. 128.80, and then that would be 131, so I don't get in the pipe. I'll shuffle it forward one more time. 123, let's see, 130F0, so that's right before the pipe, and then 132.70. So that looks to be about the furthest we can get into the pipe on any frame, because 131 would be the start of the pipe. This subpixel goes up to FF, and I'm at F0. So I'm pretty much as close to the pipe as I can get without actually being in the pipe. Then the next frame, I'm really far into the pipe, and then I get spat out again after that. So that's what's going on here. Okay, now let's see if we can replicate how to actually do these jump clips. Okay, so we've managed to get into this pipe, and let's see how Mario actually gets spit out of the pipe. The game will spit you out if you're holding right. So you can see I'm in at 132.70, and then the next frame, because I'm holding right, I get spat out one pixel at a time. So that's kind of what the game does. Now, one tactic that you'll tend to use is holding left, so 132.70, and then it only goes down to 132.60. If I don't hold left, that would be at 131 already. So here, holding left still makes Mario go to the left, but he gets spit out less fast. He's only spat out 10 subpixels rather than one entire pixel. So we can see holding left on this frame does well, and then as soon as I stop holding left, he gets spat down to 131. If I hold left again, he's still at 132. So hopefully we can see that holding left actually keeps him in the pipe for a bit longer. If I hold left, I'm at 132 for quite a few frames. But if I just let go, I jump straight back down to 130 pretty quickly. So holding left is good news. Now, the other thing that you can do to get Mario in this pipe is kind of like jumping into it. So I'm going to jump in, and jumping keeps you with some rightwards velocity. So if I jump into it and I just hold right, we get the same issue, 132.70, and you get spat back out to the left. But if I hold left, like what I said before, I don't need to start holding left there. I need to start holding left here. You can see I'm actually getting pulled into the pipe. Now, the reason for this is holding left stops Mario from being ejected to the left, but you still have the rightwards momentum from the jump pulling you to the right. So that's really, really good news. Okay, so let's look at what's going on here. Next frame, I lose a bit of speed. And that, I believe, is because Mario hit the ground. Otherwise, yeah, it's because Mario hit the ground, basically. There's not a whole lot you can do. You can get a little bit more to the right by pressing right, but then you kind of lose that speed again pretty much straight away. So that's no good. What I might try and do is get some more frames where I'm jumping in this pipe. So if I jump any earlier, you can see that I'm still kind of getting into that pipe. Maybe if I jump here. In fact, I better start jumping later, actually. So if I jump too late, I hit the next kind of tile up, and this is the very famous like wall jump frame where I believe Mario should be able to get a jump off this. There we go. So that's kind of how you do a wall jump in this game. But we're just going to jump it back a frame. So rather than hitting that, I'm going to hit and kind of like fall down to the next tile. Okay. So we can see I'm being pulled in 133, 134, and then back to 133 again. That's what's happening here. So the next thing we want to do is kind of jump again, because jumping seems to be good at clipping us into pipes. So let's jump, but we'll also play around with these left presses and see if we can maneuver them so that we can stay in the pipe a bit more. because we do get pulled up to 134, which is fantastic, but then we start losing it back down to 133. Now, if I hold left, that doesn't really change much. If I hold left there, it doesn't change much. In fact, if I hold to the right, you see it pushes me back out of the pipe. And if I hold to the right here, it looks like we're getting pulled in a little bit more if I hold right there. So for some reason, I'm allowed to press right on this frame because I go up to 133.80, but I'm not allowed to press right on this frame because I get pulled to the left. And this is the thing with clipping, it defies all logic. You basically just do trial and error until it works. Now at this point, I'll stop and mention, this is not optimized for speed. So any Mario 1 Tazzers will probably be cringing right now because I'm sure I'm doing a lot wrong. Basically what I'm trying to show you is, yes, it's possible to clip into this pipe. I might not be doing it the best way. So let's keep going. All right, so it looks like getting there pushed me up to 133.80, and then I get the jump again. Jumps are good. So I get pulled down to 132, but if I press left, I stay at that 133 and I only lose 10 subpixels rather than losing a whole pixel. So let's press left there and see what happens. I get left, 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 and then I believe my jump velocity will kind of pull me to the right. So your Mario's kind of like moving back a little bit, but then eventually, once he gets high enough, the velocity pulls him back to the right again. So let's go with that. Now let's investigate if pressing left or right helps us here. We'll look 133E0. We'll try pressing left again. That's back to 131. That's no good. What about that? Back to 131. That's not as bad, but it's still down to 133. That's not good. What about 133.20? That's a bit better. 133.40, 160, 80, A0, and C0. So it looks like if I press left anywhere in here, that's not helping me at all. Let's check pressing right. I zip back to 130 pretty much every time I try and press right on a frame. So that's really bad. I believe there's also some shenanigans in this game where pressing left and right helps, like if you press left and right at the same time, but we're not exploring that in this video. Okay, so it seems like there's not really a lot of frames where I can save time by pressing right, except for this frame right here at 704. Because it goes from E0 up to F0. So that's good. And in fact, any of these frames would do that. And if I press right on the second frame, I zip back to 131. So that's no good. All right, let's see if we can get our next jump. So we're going to try and jump again. And it does look like I've got a little hop there. So that's brilliant news. Let's look at our hop. Now, I've explored all the possibilities up to pressing right here, but I haven't explored anything after that. So let's try going left and see if that can pull us in any further. They're all 139 F0 by the looks of it. So that's not good. Let's try pressing right. Then I zip back to 130, pretty much every frame I could possibly press right. And here I'm still zipping back. That is not good. Looks like I'm just not pressing any inputs here. Now let's double check that pressing right was appropriate here, because if I let go, I'm at 139 E0, and if I press it, I'm at 139 F0. So that's good. Okay, I'm doing my little hop, and it seems that I'm able to hop and get up to 141. Okay, now again, let's do the same process, checking left and right presses and seeing if it can improve what I'm doing. Doesn't look like it. Okay, so let's try jumping again. There we go. So I've done a little hop, and that's pulled me more to the right. And eventually in this game, once you get far enough into the wall just pulls you towards the right. It's kind of weird, but that's how it works. So there we go. The wall pulls Mario to the right, and we've clipped through the pipe. If I play that back, this is what it looks like. There we go. And in the pipe. Very good. So that's sort of what you do. In this game, jumping does help you clip. That's not the case for all games. And then you kind of play with your left and right inputs until it works. But the common themes here are you want to get into the wall as far as possible by the frame before you hit the wall, getting as close as possible. And then once you're in the wall, pressing left sometimes helps you not get pushed out of the wall. And those are two very common themes we'll see. The next example I'm going through comes from my TAS of Sonic the Hedgehog on the Master System. So I'm about to show you two clips in quick succession, and they're kind of different about how they both work. So this first one, you boost into the wall, jump in the corner and go up. And this next one, pretty much the same thing, but you do it without a spring. So here's an example of how you can take something that's known about a game and extend it to other situations. Because this first spring clip has been known for ages. The spring gives you enough speed to clip into the wall, you jump into the corner, and it works. You can do this very easily RTA without TAS tools. The next clip though is much more tricky to do RTA. In fact, I don't think anyone's ever been able to do it without TAS tools. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Basically, the clip works exactly the same way, but you have much less speed coming into it. So I won't go too much into the details of this one, but essentially what's happening here is I'm getting really close to the wall on one frame, and then the next frame I'm into the wall so far that the wall kind of sucks me in, and then I'm in the wall. So the message that I really want to send here is you can take stuff that's known in a game, like the high speed spring clip, figure out why it works, and then go, hold on, this will actually work even without a spring if I'm precise enough. Now you need to stick with it, because if I were to jump for a frame longer, if I were to jump for a couple of frames shorter, that clip wouldn't have worked. So I'll keep jumping that far. And if I were to adjust my speed a little bit more by maybe pressing left a few frames earlier, let's see, maybe that's a bad example. If I were to adjust my speed by not having that down roll, then again, the clip wouldn't have worked. So clips can be extremely precise, and it can depend on very small changes that you're doing, and this can affect whether they work or not. So it's important to be persistent when you're trying to find clips and have a deep understanding of why they work so that you know whether they're possible before you try and do them. So the next method of clipping we're looking at is messing with your character's hitbox. So usually this would look like, in most cases, ducking and then unducking into a ceiling, and then you're in a ceiling and then shenanigans happen. But there are lots of examples that aren't that. So the example we're looking at comes from my Psycho Fox TAS, and this is one of many duck clips. So what we can see is I'm jumping down, going to do a duck jump here and clip straight through. So just looking at that one more time, I'm ducking and then I unduck into the roof and clip through there. And there's not much precision with that clip. It is a little bit precise, but that's really what's causing it. It's the ducking and unducking changing the hitbox and then getting snapped into the roof. So the next strategy we're looking at is try having something else push you into the wall. And this is usually because objects pushing you have a different kind of priority to collision, and the game's not really expecting an object or an enemy to push you into a wall. So our first example is called Robot Push. This was found by Ringrush, and this is footage from Outlaw. And essentially this robot is going to push Lanky Kong through the wall, saving us the need to do an orange clip. And that trick is a lot more difficult than it looks, but it does save time in speedruns. Another example of this type of clip is something that I came across while playing Rayman 2, and it's this whale pushing you out of bounds in this level. So the same concept as something like a robot push. The object pushes Rayman and kind of ignores the collision of the wall. Okay, so the next and final one we're going to look at is try adjusting your jump height. Now, this is kind of similar to the one we had before, which was try holding away from the wall. Basically what that was is pressing left sometimes pulls you to the right as the game is trying to correct for you being in the wall. Whereas this jump height one is sometimes falling down if you're in a ceiling can sometimes pull you upwards. So occasionally if you're trying to clip into a ceiling, your instinct would be, okay, well, I'm going to jump as big as possible because that's a lot of height and the ceiling is high up. But what you might actually have to do is adjust your jump height and just barely graze the ceiling, and then good things might start to happen. So the first example we'll see of this is not really a clip as such, it's more just an optimization in Sonic on the Game Gear. So what we're trying to do is jump up to this platform, And as you can hopefully see, if I do a big jump and kind of line myself up with the platform, Sonic will land on the platform and all is good. That's kind of what was supposed to happen, so that's wonderful. And then what you might be wanting to do later on in the game, if you're trying to climb up something steep, for example, is you'd want to jump as soon as possible. So frame 3858 is where I can do that jump. Good. Okay, but if I start pulling back my jump, can I get this jump to happen any sooner than frame 3858? You wouldn't really think so, but what actually happens is this platform only pulls Sonic up when he starts falling down. So I can actually make this jump happen a bit sooner if I pull back my initial jump to the platform. So now I've got it on 3857, which is a lot better. And there we go. So that's an example of how you can kind of use this to optimize jump height. And in fact, if the platform was moving away from me and moving upwards, then I may actually need to do this to catch the platform. So for our final example in this episode, we're going to return back to what we've been working on, which is the Castle of Illusion practice mode TAS. So where we left off, we were looking at these platform cycles, and pretty soon we'll have to do some clips, just like that one. Now, if you look at a proper TAS of Castle of Illusion, you will see this clip through the platform in the TAS, and we're going to figure out basically how do we replicate that. Before I move on to that, I'll just note here that there's some nuance in this jump here, in that we're grazing this little block, and in the Mickey Mouse games, that increases your jump height a bit. I'll just note that in case you're trying to match where I'm up to with the TAS, but it's not a very common thing that you'll see in games. It's a very special thing with Mickey Mouse. Okay, so I'll walk you through the process that I went through to try and figure out how this jump clip worked, because that's sort of what I had to do to make this tutorial. Look at the clip in the proper TAS and figure out what's going on. But if you do want to follow along with how the TAS is going, you can get this big chunky lag frame block starting at 4046. So see if you can match that on your way out at the end. Okay. So what I did essentially was just let Mickey sit on the platform and tried jumping up to this roof. So we'll truncate that back. And Mickey's going to do a big jump and then nothing. Okay. So the clip isn't quite as easy as we thought it was. I thought perhaps it was jumping into the corner, and that's not quite as easy as we thought. And then it could be something to do with clipping into this wall. Because this is a corner, it's not overly clear whether we're clipping into the wall or the roof. So I tried clipping into the wall for a little bit. I won't bore you with that. But essentially what I did was I tried lowering Mickey's jump height. And as I lowered Mickey's jump height, this happened. So that was great. So it looks like this is another one of those jump clips that I was talking about, the very last type of clip. And we can see that lowering the height allows Mickey to get stuck. And it's only this one very particular jump height here that actually works. So Mickey gets in there, and then from here, he can jump out. I would normally play around with the clips, so I try running left, nothing happens. I try running right, nothing happens. So usually what you would just do is you jump out as soon as you can. Or you might try playing with left and right while you're in the wall. Nothing really special happens there. So basically Mickey could jump out and then climb up the ladder. Now that's the way that this initially worked. Then I tried to optimize it a bit more by waiting for the platform to come, running left as far as I could, and then jumping as soon as I could without bonking the roof. Because that's really what you would do when you optimize this, is you jump as soon as you can. And you can see that Mickey's got some weird stuff going on here. He is clipping through that platform a little bit. Now the reason why he's not clipping into it like he was before is because our jump height is a little bit different for having bonked this corner. So I'm going to go through here, take a right turn, and Mickey clips pretty quickly. So in fact, in this case, we replicated the glitch while doing a full jump, and the reason we got away with that is because we bonked the corner a bit. And that lines up our subpixels correctly to clip into this block here. And that's really good news. So then you just turn right as soon as you can, within reason. And you do a short jump, you get in there, but if you do a big jump, you get in here. So what I'd suggest trying here is do a short jump and then see how quickly you can get up the ladder. If you do a short jump, you can do another jump, I guess, from this frame here. I'd keep holding right, but hey, that's not great because you bonked the ladder. So would a later jump help? No, it wouldn't. So you'd have to do a shorter jump here, bonk the ladder, and then maybe like climb up it. In fact, what's probably better would be to do like a bigger jump without bonking the roof and then climb the ladder. So then you climb it, and I forget exactly what I said before, but 4058 was this one. There's a few other ways you could look at it. You could do a bigger jump here so that you land more on the ground, and then you could do a bigger jump up the ladder. Maybe wait until you can climb the ladder. And that's looking a lot better, like 4044 territory. And then you could optimize by changing when you turn to the right, essentially. There's 4044 there. You could even try doing a bigger jump, see if you can jump any sooner with a bigger jump. Not really. Still 4044. You could try different left and right amounts. Maybe that would help. Nope, can't jump any sooner. So 4044 looks pretty good. 4042 if you start climbing the ladder a bit earlier. And 4046 if you climb it too early. So 4042 is looking very nice. I'm actually curious to see now what my initial attempt looked like. In fact, it was 4046. So we've actually managed to save a few frames on my initial attempt. So that's quite good. So see how you go, you should be around this territory, 4046 or 4042. And that's an example of one of those clips that involve jump height. So getting your subpixels all right. So now we've seen a few common methods of clipping. I will stress that this is not a complete list. Lots of different games have lots of different ways to clip. I haven't even talked about deloading objects and clipping into them, or about the concept that a corner is usually a lot weaker than a flat surface. But these are a few ideas to start trying out. And if I can stress one thing, it would be to look at a lot of different speed games and figure out how they do their clips, because then you'll get more tools in your toolbox and more ideas when you're looking for clips yourself. Thanks for watching this part of the Taz tutorial, and I'll see you next time.